Welcome everyone. My name's Kasey March. I'm an end-of-life doula. I'm going to talk about what that means. So today's presentation is called On Death and Dying. What I'm really talking about is the role of an end-of-life doula, how we provide support, sort of the history, how we got here, and then I want to talk to you and I want to hear from you. When Bugbee Center sent out information and said someone's going to be talking about On Death and Dying, you said yes and showed up in number, which is amazing. So I'd like to know what you're hoping to hear today and answer as many questions as possible. So understanding end-of-life doulas. I apologize, I normally don't read off slides, but you can't see the slides, so I'm going to read off of them. So an end-of-life doula is a trained professional who provides non-medical, holistic support and comfort to individuals and their families during the dying process. That is a lot of words to say. We work one-on-one with clients and their families at end of life. Not doctors, not nurses, not hospice providers of palliative care. Lots of time lay people or folks who are retired from those professions who've got some additional training and who are really helping with the practical, logistical, social, and emotional aspects of end of life. So I want to give you some historical context about how end-of-life doulas came to be. End-of-life care has evolved significantly, shifting from family-centered at-home care, which was the norm until about the 1950s, to more institutional care in hospitals, nursing homes, rehab centers, and things like that from sort of the 1960s on. And there's good reason for that. Some of it is because there were great advancements in medical care, right? Things that used to cause end of life that no longer did, and so you went to a hospital. But there were also some things that got lost in translation. When we started with at-home care, with families centered around you, and with folks having practices and familiarity with the dying process, that looked a particular way. And now, when the norm is to die in a hospital, potentially, or a nursing home or other facility, that can look very different. So there was a reaction to this early on. In the 1960s, Dame Cicely Saunders started hospice care, as we know it, over in Europe. And it was a great idea, and people loved it, and it jumped across the pond, and we started doing it here. And it gets covered by health insurance. So hospice is available to anyone with a terminal diagnosis and a prognosis of 6 months or less. Hospice providers can come into your home and provide services, or those services can be provided at facilities like nursing homes. So hospice gets covered by your health insurance, which means health insurance writes the rules for what hospice can and cannot do and how they need to do those things. In recent years, that's a lot of pressure for a hospice to provide lots and lots of services on sometimes small reimbursements. And so doulas help fill the gaps sometimes, right? What they also do is provide a lot of education. In this process of transitioning from home-based end-of-life care to institution-based end-of-life care, individual people don't have as much day-to-day familiarity with the dying process. And that means we don't know what to do. When someone is declining or actively dying, we can feel really uncomfortable in those one-on-one situations where you're trying to talk to a friend whose health is declining and who might be scared or, trying to navigate that process, or a loved one who's figuring out what kind of treatment they want to pursue, or you're making those decisions for yourself. We just don't experience it in our everyday lives the same way we used to. And so doulas help people navigate that. So what are the core responsibilities of an end-of-life doula? We provide emotional support. That's offering compassionate presence and active listening to the dying person and their loved ones. We also offer practical assistance, and that's everything with helping with end-of-life planning. You've probably heard people talk about things like advance directives or naming your healthcare agent. Some folks don't know what they even should be thinking about for end-of-life planning, don't know where to start. And so a doula gets to know you in your particular situation and can help you answer some of the questions of, what are some of the things I could be thinking about and might want to plan for? They also help with things like legacy projects and figuring out what you want to do for after-death body care. Every state has different laws about how things like funerals and memorial celebrations are handled, what kind of professionals do that. And so in addition to figuring out if you have a spiritual tradition that you follow, or if there are particular practices in your family, deciding whether or not you want to work with a funeral home, a crematorium, a natural burial ground, because that's legal here in Vermont and we have those, or something else, a doula can help you understand what options are available in your region. You might have heard of things like water cremation, which is available in some states but not in others, or mushroom suits for folks who want to decompose that way. Navigating what all those different options are when this is not something you do every day can be tricky, especially when we're on one side of the river in Vermont and some things are available here, and you cross over in New Hampshire and different things are available there. We also offer vigil presence. So when someone is transitioning and actively dying, doulas can be there at the bedside, no matter where that is, not only to help make sure whatever plan was put in place by the client is followed through, but to provide support to the loved ones who are visiting, to make sure that everyone can step away from the bedside for a couple of minutes to go to the bathroom, have a cup of tea, take care of themselves, and know that their loved one is being cared for. And then the last is post-death care. So assisting families with early grief processing and memorial preparations. And a lot of that can be talking educationally. We don't serve as funeral directors, so doulas don't get paid to plan memorials for you, but they can help educate you on what resources are available. Doulas collaborate with medical professionals. We don't compete. It's a very, I would say, integrative process. I like to think of the hospice care as being part of the team that I work on. So what doulas do is they complement the other services that you have by addressing non-medical needs, right? You have a doctor's appointment, they go over your test results, they go over your treatment options, and that happens in 20 minutes. And sometimes that's really overwhelming, right? There are a lot of things that come up and you don't even think to ask all of the questions that we've all had the experience. 5 minutes after the doctor's appointment, you start driving away and you think of something you wish you'd asked. And now you're trying to get on the portal to ask your doctor or call and wait for them to call you back. One of the nice things about working with a doula is you can work with them to prepare for some of those meetings. I use the BRAIN framework with my clients to teach folks how to ask questions and get really good information so that they can make values-based decisions for themselves. But also, some doulas will go with you to an appointment. They will be your note taker so that all you have to do is focus on asking those questions. If you've had a conversation ahead of time about your goals and you get swept away during that appointment with your doctor and don't remember to ask, they can gently say, hey, you said you wanted to ask what the trade-offs are of this particular option. Do you still want to do that? I noticed we didn't cover it today. It's another support person. They also ensure consistency in end-of-life care through effective communication, right? Just making sure that for folks who don't navigate healthcare all day, every day, but a doula does help you do that, they're helping you use the language that your doctors might recognize, or helping you understand some of the language that might come at you that is overwhelming. So the benefits of working with an end-of-life doula. There are several people getting doctorates right now who are actually doing research on end-of-life doulas. I got interviewed by one recently. Her dissertation just became available. It's 219 pages. She's written a book. It's amazing. I'm really excited to read it. But when I talk about the benefits of end-of-life doula, this is research that is coming out now that they are in the process of publishing. So enhanced quality of life during the dying process, personalized end-of-life experience, respecting the individual's wishes and cultural practices. And then folks are experiencing emotional relief and guidance for families, reducing anxiety and fear associated with death. One of the things that I find myself doing frequently is when I am at the bedside for vigil, one of the things that I have been trained on is normal signs and symptoms of active dying. Things that often happen in the dying process that if you've not witnessed a natural death before, might come as a shock and a surprise to you. And so what I do for families is let them know this is completely normal. It's not something to be concerned about. When it is something that might sound or look concerning to them, but we know from research is not uncomfortable. And when you might want to call hospice and say, can we make an adjustment? I'm seeing signs that things are changing. I'm worried about comfort, right? And that significantly reduces anxiety and fear for folks. So I've talked a little bit about my training, right? So you might be wondering, what kind of training or certification do doulas get? End-of-life doulas are not licensed professionals the way that nurses and CNAs are, okay? So there are lots of different training programs. UVM runs an amazing one. So there are lots of folks in this area that actually do the training program for UVM. But there are many reputable programs. They don't have consistent necessarily curriculum. There's an organization right now, the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance, that is working on, they want to offer certification, so a comprehensive exam that anyone who does any program can take, and then they can say they're a certified doula. But that certification process is done independently by a third party. It's not a governmental organization or anything like that. So my recommendation when I talk to people and they say they want to hire a doula is to interview people and make sure that their training and experience lines up with your goals. It's why I created a PDF on how to choose an end-of-life doula, which again, the sign-up sheet is coming around, but you're all going to get a copy of it so that if this is something you ever want to pursue, you can make sure that any professional you're working with is aligned with your particular needs and values. Okay, I raced through the portion where we would have had slides, but I want to know why folks are here today, what sort of questions you have, and how I can help. So I'm going to run around the room and grab any questions folks have already written down on their sheet, but to give folks a few minutes to write down questions on their sheet, does any brave soul want to raise their hand and start us? Oh, yes, okay. All right, I saw your hand first, and then we'll come over here.
One of my biggest fears in getting close to death is I will make my wishes very, very clear. But I'm worried the medical community, are they really going to respect my wishes, or do I need somebody there to make sure that they follow my wishes? Because I don't want to live forever.
Sure. So the question was, I want to make my medical decisions really, really clear, and will that be respected by medical professionals who have access to it? And so, or do I need to appoint other people? How can I really sort of protect myself? So there's a couple of resources that are going to be really helpful. One is you live in the wonderful state of Vermont, I am assuming. No, you live across the border in New Hampshire. That's okay too. All right. We're also going to talk about that. Okay, so do you have an advance directive?
Not yet, but can I give a plug right here? It has nothing to do with, diminishing your role. But the Aging Resource Center at Dartmouth, Lori Fortini will sit down and help you fill out all these forms.
Yep.
And scan it into your medical records,
Yep.
which is a huge service.
Yes.
But anyway, yeah, there'll be no question about what I want.
Okay, so tell me the name of Lori's department again so I can repeat it for everybody. Aging Resource Center?
Dartmouth Aging Resource Center.
Okay, so the Dartmouth Aging Resource Center has professionals that, like Lori Fortini, who will help you fill out advanced directive forms, have them all scanned in and sent to medical professionals so that they can be respected. So step one is if you know or would like some forms to guide you through the questions that will help you know what kind of medical procedures you do or do not want and when you might want them. So you might say, I don't want a feeding tube if my condition is not likely to improve for X, Y, and Z reasons, right? Like you can make these things conditional. There are forms. There's a long form and a short form in Vermont. New Hampshire has different forms. Again, it's okay. They honor each other's. But there are forms that you can walk through to answer all of these questions. So step one is filling out an advance directive. And there are agencies that help you fill those out. If you're reading through it and you're going, there's medical terminology on here that I don't understand, I don't know what this procedure is, that's okay. You don't have to struggle through the paperwork. There are people to help with that. The second piece is filling out paperwork to name someone as your medical agent and saying, if I am not in a position where I can articulate what my medical wishes are, this person knows, and they're the one that's allowed to do it for me. It is totally different than a financial power of attorney. I hear people say power of attorney, and they use it interchangeably for the financial piece and the medical piece. You can make it the same person, but they're not the same thing. They're two separate things. And you can make them two separate people. Is this helpful? So, the best way to safeguard your choices being executed is to have both pieces, because then there is a person who is also making sure folks are following through on your wishes.
And also, they'll help you with the DNR, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
And Sue, has direct contact to the Aging Resource Center. So Sue is definitely a resource also.
Yes. Sue's in the back of the room. I have one question up here, and then I'm going to come back to you. Yeah.
Okay. I just think it's really important that we know that there are carnivorous, so that if, like, I'm concerned about, dementia, and if I'm taking,
Yes.
I don't want to be fed.
Yes.
And I think it's really important about who's there and who honors this, because so often it's an emergency and they come in and it's like, it's a big blur, and we want, I almost feel like some people have tattooed on their arms, DNR or whatever.
Yes.
So it's a really good question, and I think a lot depends on who's there when you get there, if it's in the hospital, how the whole thing kind of comes together.
They will not honor tattoo, I have been told.
So, but one of the points that was really important about what was just made is there are also specialized advance directives for certain conditions. So if you have an early Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis and you want to articulate, when I can't articulate these things for myself later, this is how I want to do that. There are specialized forms for that. They also work for other illnesses that can take away cognition before some other systems fail. All right, I saw another question.
What's your opinion on death with dignity, taking the pill?
It's not a pill. Okay, so the question I got is what is my opinion on death with dignity? So I'm a holistic end-of-life doula, and I support people's right to autonomy and making their medical decisions. So whatever you are choosing for your end-of-life care, that is your choice and based on your values, and I support people through those processes, whatever is legally available to them. In Vermont, we allow medical aid in dying, which is a process where someone who is terminally ill with a prognosis of 6 months or less, who's over the age of 18, who can make their own medical decisions, is able to request a lethal medication from their doctor to hasten their death. I have worked with clients. I'm a Wayfinder for Patient Choices Vermont. That's the advocacy group that helps the law get passed here. And so I help people navigate what all of the administrative pieces of that process are, and I do help families who are going through that process. That's a very particular type of end-of-life vigil, and I do support them. I also, to make it very clear, support people who choose things like voluntary stopping eating and drinking, again, where that is legal to do, which it is here in Vermont, who choose to stop doing any sort of medical care. So maybe lots of different treatment options have been offered to them, but they've decided the trade-offs of quality of life are not worth it. I honor that as well. I respect people's individual values and their choices. Yeah.
I have a second part. 2 years ago, I'm battling an incurable cancer. And 2 years ago, I had a heart attack caused by an experimental drug that would prevent me from getting COVID. So I I said, no, I don't want you to do anything. So they called my son down who works at Dartmouth. Your mother is giving us a very hard time. Take her in. I'm in my 3rd year. I'm thrilled, but what do you do when somebody doesn't honor your wish at the time?
So legal, like, I'm not a lawyer, so legal resource-wise, I can't answer that question. But this might sound like a personal. The first thing that I would consider is the person they asked, the person who is my medical agent, and moving forward, do I want to change that? Do I want to have a heart-to-heart conversation with them because they didn't honor my wishes in the way that I wanted, or do I want to elect somebody else who I feel is going to be better prepared to listen to what I want my wishes to be and to follow through even if that doesn't line up with what they might want for me? Those are difficult conversations to navigate, for sure. But personally, that's what I might do, and certainly what I would coach a client to do.
I'm glad he said that.
Yes,
He's taking me to Philadelphia, to Pittsburgh to see a Billy Joel concert in July. So I'm glad he said no.
All right, I'm going to pause for just a moment and walk around the room to collect any slips in case we have anonymous questions, and then I'm going to take more hands as well, okay?
Seek out a doula.
Okay, so the question was, how does one seek out an end-of-life doula? So, just like there are many training facilities, there's 4 major databases that list end-of-life doulas. So one of the things that you could do is you could literally Google end-of-life doula and your state, your hometown, and get Google results. You could go to the death doula database. It's literally a website. Click on your state and see everyone who's listed. There's also, you guys, you don't have to frantically write this down. I will email out these databases. INELDA is one of the major training groups. They have a database. The National End-of-Life Doula Alliance is the group that I was talking about who wants to run that certification training. They have a database. Also, asking for recommendations. If you are connected with end-of-life professionals like hospice or palliative care, sometimes they are starting to interact a lot more frequently with doulas, and they can make recommendations. I spend a lot of time down in the Brattleboro area because I volunteer for a hospice, a non-medical hospice actually, the last one in the state, down in that area. And the medical hospice in that area, Bayada, gives out my contact information to folks, their nurses, because I've interacted with so many people. So it depends. The PDF that I'm going to give everyone that talks about like how to find someone that's a good fit, I believe also lists the 4 databases that are the biggest ones that tell you who are the doulas in the area. Is that helpful? Okay, great. Yes?
Well, it's a jargon thing that I'm not aware of. Can you differentiate hospice care and palliative care
Yes.
for me?
Yeah. Okay. So the question is, what's the difference between hospice and palliative care? So both of them are sort of modalities of care. Palliative care is available to folks who have life-limiting illnesses, chronic illnesses, and things like that. It is focused on quality of life, not necessarily cure, right? Hospice is specifically available to folks who have a terminal diagnosis with a prognosis of 6 months or less. So you might think of hospice as being almost a form of palliative care, but much more specialized and narrow, if that makes sense. The goal of both of them is holistic, right? It is about having the best quality of life. It is not necessarily about curing whatever you are experiencing. In some cases, because you have an illness that's incurable, but in some cases, because you might have an illness that is going to be lifelong. So in that case, you would be on palliative care. And you really want to manage your illness and your treatment options based on your values. And so palliative care is focused on that.
Is that pain management then?
So pain management, symptom management, deciding when you want to do treatments and when you don't, there are trade-offs a lot of times, right? So They might say, a doctor might say to you, we have this chemo option. I'm going to use cancer because lots of folks have had experience with that with someone in their life and recognize a lot of these things. So there is a chemo option that's available. In 35% of cases, it extends quality of life by 6 months to a year. The trade-offs are, during this 9 months of chemo, you're going to experience this kind of fatigue, this kind of nausea, You get to decide what is most important to you. Some folks really feel, I would rather have the quality of life I'm experiencing now with good pain management or symptom management, knowing that my longevity would be decreased. And so palliative care is there for you in those situations where you're deciding, I want to do this treatment, or I don't want to do this treatment, I want to do this symptom management, and I'm talking about those as being different things. They also intersect. It's not one or the other. Yes, blue shirt, and then we'll come over.
I'm really interested in like how they, how often you're called. I mean, I was a volunteer at Gifford for 10 years as a volunteer chaplain. So I ended up being at End-of-LIfe several times.
Yes.
But I'm just interested in like, for us who have a life and are retired, how, are you just on call? Do you have days when you say, yes, I'm available, or no, I'm not? Or you just come at the drop of a hat if you're called?
Sure. Okay, so basically, how often is Kasey on call as an end-of-life doula, and how often do I show up at the bedside? So clients work with me in a variety of ways. Some clients are reaching out to me because they have reached the age that is the age that mom died, dad died, and they realize they want to put some plans in place. Or they've gotten a diagnosis and they want to make sure that they've done the important papers. And so things are not imminent right now, and they are not necessarily looking for a doula who's going to be there at their bedside. They're looking for a doula that's going to help them navigate, man, there's a lot of paperwork to this, and I don't even know where to start, and that's really stressful. Or I need to have a conversation with my spouse about this, but I would like to figure out how I feel about it first, because they have a stake in how that conversation goes, and you want to be able to present it in a certain way, feeling sure of your feelings. So I don't necessarily have vigil, right, for those clients. There are other clients who specifically reach out to me for those services, and so in those situations, we have a better sense of like what their prognosis is, how soon that looks. I don't take more than 2 clients like that at any given point in time, because I don't ever want to be in a situation where I get a phone call and I'm at person A's house and person B needs me. So I'm very particular about that. I also serve as a vigil volunteer for my local hospice, and so I get a call whenever that hospice has a situation, but there is a whole team of us that fills those needs. Yeah, you're welcome. Go ahead.
You partially answered my question.
That's-
I wanted to know at what stage, and so not the advanced planning piece, but more when death is really imminent. At what point do people call you, or what point do you go in?
So the question was, at what point do people call you, not for advanced planning, but for sort of more of the bedside support? Yeah. I'm going to give the annoying answer of, it depends. And it depends on what folks are looking for. So it's always too early until it's too late. Everybody always thinks there's going to be more time to do this. One of the difficult things for families is when you can no longer communicate your wishes and they really want to do whatever it was that you would have wanted, and they don't know what that thing is. So whether it's your dear friends or your spouse or your adult children, all might have a different perspective on what they think you would have wanted. Those interactions between them, on top of the anticipatory grief that they're experiencing about potentially losing you, can be really hard. And so one of the things that I say to folks is, if you are starting to think about what you want things to look like, that's a better conversation to have now, to outline what I want my end of life to look like. And that could be anything, right? We could be talking about scene setting of, I really want to be at home, I want this kind of music played, I don't want this particular person visiting, I would like people to say goodbye at this time, I don't want people crying at the bedside, I do, the family pets can be there, they can't. All of those things, right? Grandchildren are allowed to visit, I don't want the small children to, right? Like, you can talk about what's really important to you. And doulas can kind of guide you through what are some of the things that you might want to think about, because I just mentioned pets and lots of people went, oh, as if, yeah, I'd never considered that piece, right? So those conversations are good to have earlier, because you can have time to sit with the information and decide, get it documented, and have it shared with the people that need to know. If you're waiting until you're physically feeling much worse, closer to transitioning, when you might not be able to communicate for yourself, it can be hard because you feel like you're pressed for time to make these decisions, and because you just don't feel good. And who makes their best decisions when they're not feeling great? Or you're spending much more time doing introspection, right? Thinking about internal things, and planning becomes not your major priority, and maybe that's a natural part of the process and the way things should be. Yeah. I'm going to answer one of the questions on here and then come back out to the audience. Okay, so one of them was, how do you find a death doula, which we talked about. If I want to stay home as late as possible, what do I do? And then there's a note in here about Aging Resource Center and advanced directives. Okay, so if I want to stay home as late as possible, what do I do? You are allowed to die at home. So as late as possible could mean that you're staying till the very end. It also can mean your body stays at home for some time. There are folks that help with in-home after-death body care. In the state of Vermont, they do not get paid to come and do anything with bodies, right? Only funeral directors do that. But education, helping people understand how this process works, training, that is all available. And some people do choose to stay at home. And some people do choose to have visitation happen at home. That is available. So you can potentially stay home as long as you want. There are plenty of people who do home funerals here in the state of Vermont. Again, that is something that we are allowed to do. You might all know of a farm in your neighborhood that has a family cemetery on it, and that's how they've been doing things for generations. That's not really foreign and new here. If that is something that you are interested in, I do recommend having a conversation with your town clerk, because they are the ones that fill out the correct paperwork and have the place where someone is buried put on the deed for your home. And sometimes they don't know that they are supposed to do that, because their job is vast and there are lots of pieces. And so there's a little bit of an educational process that happens. So if that is part of your plan, I recommend seeking out those resources early so that it is as smooth for the folks who are going to be executing it as possible. Okay, yeah.
I'm not clear about the difference in services from hospice and a doula.
Sure. So hospice provides lots of different resources, right? They have a big umbrella of services. So a nurse would be available to you. So that's a medical provider that's going to come into your home. A lot of times you're going to have a social worker that is available. You're going to have hospice volunteers who can do some of the things that I've talked about, like doulas do, vigil services, visiting, things like that. There's going to be a chaplain who's going to be able to do spiritual provision and things like that. So there is overlap between things that doulas do and things that hospices do. Doulas can be supplemental, right? So they can add additional hours. Your hospice can only provide so much support for so much time. But also the focus can be a little bit different, and so you might have a particular, we'll say, value set or modality that you want to work with, and you want to find a doula that really well aligns with that. That's okay too, right? So I see hands. I promise I'll come back. I'll come over there. It really depends. Also, doulas some doulas specialize in other things that are available. So they offer guided imagery, or they offer Reiki, or they are also massage therapists. And so they are trained end-of-life practitioners that have some of those other skill sets as well. Some of them offer bedside music and are musicians who come in and do that as well. So it really depends. There are a lot of different skill sets. This is one of the reasons why I've created this PDF on how to choose an end-of-life doula. There's this title, but it does not perfectly map onto one type of professional. And so overall, doulas are additional support people. Overall, they are trained on death and dying. Overall, they are educators. Overall, they provide practical and emotional support. Individual doulas specialize in different ways. And so when you think of your particular situation and you think about the things that are most challenging or are most concerning, a doula can be a person that can help with that particular need, and you're finding the person who's going to fill that gap for you or for your family. Is that helpful? Okay. I saw a hand over here. Yeah?
Are doulas covered by insurance?
They are not. So
what is the rate of?
again, it depends. So when I did my training as an end-of-life doula, this was a really big conversation, and it still is. I personally believe that everybody should have access to a well-supported death, right? And so I am a person who is relatively new in my career and has to afford my mortgage and things like that, and I charge for services, and I offer sliding scale so that I can offer services to as many people as possible. Understanding their budgets, I also try to make a really strong effort to, if there is a resource that is available to you already that does what you need for free or is going to be covered by your insurance, I tell you to use that resource, not to hire me, right? However, there are also lots of end-of-life doulas who work completely pro bono or voluntarily. Sometimes they're retired hospice nurses, or they had been volunteers for many years, and so they get this additional training, and it's something that they do. I have many colleagues who this is sort of a second career for them. They have retired from their first career, and this is another thing that they are doing, and they offer these services for free. There are people who can afford to pay for services, and there are people who can't. So I feel that there is space, and I don't experience competition. I genuinely feel that there is space for doulas who can provide both. There are not as many people who can offer completely pro bono services as there are people who could benefit from it. Yes?
Thank you. A minute ago, you talked about a question of staying at home as long as possible. My question has to do with all of us probably know situations where people have stayed at home as long as possible and they end up on the floor or something and they end up incapacitated. Do you interact with first responders, for example, in that situation? Give us some comments about how you might interact through other services offered by the community.
Sure. So we talked a little bit before about staying at home as long as possible. And if something happens, there's a fall and someone ends up on the floor and they need to call 911, or how do doulas sort of help with that? So one of the things that I strongly encourage is the planning piece, right? Like, we talk about disease progression, we talk about limitations to daily life activities. If you're choosing to stay home, what resources do you have in place for that? And when things change, what kind of resources do you want to use for that? And those are hard conversations. People do not want to talk about when you can't take a shower by yourself. What do you want to do? Do you want to stay home? Is that something that your family and your household can manage? If not, can you afford to pay a private caregiver? Do you qualify for hospice? Are they going to send someone in 1 to 2 times a week to help with that? We talk about those resources. So that's the ideal situation, right? Is that we've had a transparent conversation, we've planned for those things. The other end of the spectrum is that hasn't happened for a variety of reasons. Maybe I've come into the process later in the game. We are already at that point, and the planning hasn't happened. So some things to be aware of in that moment is someone has fallen, you can call 911. There are people who are trained to help with appropriate ways to do lifting and care so that someone is not hurt, right? Because I am not a medical professional and I am not a CNA, so I'm not trained to pick people up to make sure that we're not causing additional damage, or if they have broken something, that we're not making it worse. And so I know that information, and so I'm calling 911 and making sure that that's happening and staying with the individual. Luckily, that has not happened in my experience yet, but I do know what we need to do in those situations. So some of it is helping navigate those pieces as well. Yeah.
I worry about EMTs, ambulances, et cetera, not even searching for a DNR in your home, or know that your last wishes, and they're there to save you.
Yep. So in the state of Vermont, and also in New Hampshire, they're trained to look on your refrigerator.
Oh, good.
So okay, sorry, I didn't repeat the question. There is a concern about EMTs are trained to save you and that they might come into your home and not even look for a DNR if you have one. So I've actually had the privilege of talking to EMTs who do training in the Brattleboro area, and was told our staff is trained that if you have a DNR and it's normally on like a neon pink sheet of paper, put it on your refrigerator, because that's where they're trained to look. That's the first place they're trained to look for it. There are lots of different products. There's something called My DNR Wish, and it has a pretty folder. And again, they come in neon colors. You can put them on the front door to your house. You could put them in your refrigerator. You can have as many copies as you want. In the state of Vermont, your DNR that you have on display does not have to be the original copy signed by you and your doctor. It can be a photocopy. That's okay. So you could have them displayed in multiple places. They have some sensitive information on them, so some folks don't just want the neon pink sheet on their refrigerator door looking at them every time they go to get a glass of orange juice. So you can get these folders that say, My DNR Wish, or whatever. There's a million of these companies. And they are great. They are great resources. But it is a folder. Again, it's a neon color. It says DNR right on it. And so the providers know to look in that particular location, but you're not staring the actual sheet in the face every day that you walk by this piece of paper. Yeah.
I've had to call the ambulance multiple times, and every single time the Hartford EMTs have come, they have asked me, and they have looked on the refrigerator to find where, and even though I didn't have the whole thing there, I had all the medications, the doctors, and the basic instructions.
Yep.
And that was what was
completely straightforward.
Every single time.
Okay, so not just Kasey telling you, lived experience of that is how it worked.
So my concern is getting Alzheimer's disease, not knowing who I am, who anybody else is, and having to exist. I'm not living at that stage. So what do I do about that?
So if you get an Alzheimer's diagnosis, the first step is to have a conversation with your provider about what all of your end-of-life options are. So I would request what is called an end-of-life consult. It is covered by health insurance, where they talk about all of your options. If you get a healthcare provider that says something, and not most healthcare providers don't do this, but I have gotten this feedback from clients before, so I'm going to share. If you get a healthcare provider that says, we're not there yet, that's morbid, we've got time, say, I really, for peace of mind, need to be talking about these things. I need to know what my options are. Can you direct me to someone else who would be willing to have this conversation? And they might connect you to the social worker in their office, or a different provider. That is your right. So that conversation should be had with you. And you can talk about, so the reason that I'm not going to give specific, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this, is there are lots of different ways that Alzheimer's, dementia, other progressive neurological conditions can roll out. And so what options might be appropriate for each of those conditions are going to be different.
You had said there's some forms that you can fill out.
Yes.
So where would I get those aging resources?
Yep. So a couple of places that you can get them. You can get them from the Aging Resource Center, and what you're looking for is the advanced directive, and it says dash dementia or dash Alzheimer's. You can also get them from the Vermont Ethics Network website, because they have been contracted by the state to do education on advanced directives, and so they have lots of resources on their website walking you through. They also do webinars. I know we like in-person events, but if you want to watch a webinar, there's recordings and things like that that walk you through some of these forms as well. Yeah.
There's also the Dartmouth Dementia Directive, which you can get online.
Yep. Dartmouth also has their own dementia directive, which you can fill out online and scan and put into the advanced directive repository for the state of Vermont, which all medical providers know to look at. So if something happened and an ambulance took you to a hospital in Vermont and you were not responsive, a normal part of that process is they check that online directory. And so in New Hampshire, what you might do is you fill out your advanced directive and you send it to all of your medical providers, and that's great too. Some states have this like database for the entire state, some states don't. It's not the same in all 50 states, so I apologize. Yes.
Have you or do you work with community nurses?
Have I or do I work with community nurses? Yes, I actually, well, so I don't directly work with the community nurse, but I had a client who was told that she was graduating from hospice. Has anyone heard this term before? Okay, so it's a euphemism for you're receiving a living discharge. You were placed on hospice because your prognosis was 6 months or less. You started using hospice resources, and either your condition stabilized enough that your prognosis is no longer 6 months or less, or it has improved enough, because sometimes that happens, right? You're getting this really great care and your condition has improved enough that, again, your prognosis is no longer 6 months or less, and so you graduate, which means you're not on hospice anymore. And the challenge of not being on hospice anymore is sometimes there were supports and services in place, like an aide coming into your home 3 times a week to help with a shower, or the nurse coming in and doing your blood work and sending it out. That is no longer available. Now the expectation is you're going to a doctor's appointment. And so when this happened to my client, who travel was very difficult for medical reasons, but there was still, we'll say, like blood work type things that needed to be done regularly. She ended up getting connected with community nurses because they could come into her home and provide support. Folks probably don't know, My Community Nurses is something that we have here in Vermont. They are a nonprofit, and they are nurses that are coming into folks' homes, but they don't have the hospice requirement. You don't have to have a prognosis of 6 months or less. And so it's called My Community Nurses. You can look up on their website which counties they are in. But yes, I have worked with people who have used the community nurses before and only have wonderful things to say about them. Yes.
What if you have a condition where you feel that you're suffering intolerably, and yet you don't have a prognosis of 6 months? In other words, you could continue a long time, and you're just suffering.
So what if you don't? So what if you have a condition where you are suffering intolerably, but your prognosis is longer than 6 months or less? So you're an excellent candidate for palliative care, right? Who should be helping with treatment management and other supports. But are you asking because you're saying, I would choose something like medical aid in dying, but that's not available to me? So what are the alternatives? Yeah. It's a complicated question, right? So some of it is talking to your providers about your particular situation, what sort of interventions and treatments you are using right now, what sort of side effects and things what sort of symptoms you are experiencing, and what can be changed to improve your quality of life, right? Because sometimes you're experiencing the assumption a lot of times is that the highest value is longevity, that you want to be here as long as possible. And you instead have to articulate My highest value is whatever it is, whether it's comfort, pain management. I want to be clear-headed as long as possible. You have to articulate that to your medical providers so that when you are talking about the interventions that you are being offered, you can ask what the trade-offs are and make choices that fit your situation. So I don't want to take this medication that has X, Y, and Z side effects because those side effects are intolerable to me. I actually don't want to treat this illness at all anymore. I just want pain management, for example, or I just want. Those are really important things for your provider to know. They get maybe 20 minutes at a time to talk to you, and so they do their best to know what everybody wants, but medical school has probably taught them one set of values, their life experience has taught them one set of values, and then there's your actual set of values and what you want in your particular situation. So there is sort of a push and pull. So what you can do in those situations is make it really clear what your values are and then ask. I'm going to send everybody the brain framework that I use. It's a series of questions that you can ask a medical provider so that you get really good information on how a particular intervention or course of treatment might impact your life, and then you can decide what you want. And you can also ask for alternatives. You're always allowed to ask for alternatives. Yes?
There seems to be a lot of discussion about DNR. This is from my own personal experience. My mother-in-law had a DNR, and she was in the hospital of all things, and her husband countered the DNR, and she was given a tracheotomy and a lot of things that didn't make her comfortable, and she was very, I think it was very selfish of him to put her through that, and it didn't lead to longevity. The other question I have is, you mentioned the 6 months with the hospice. We just had the experience of Jimmy Carter's been on hospice for what?
Yes.
Is it follow the dollars or what?
Okay, so let's talk about prognosis. Okay, so a terminal diagnosis means that you have a disease that is it's not curable, right? So that's a terminal diagnosis. A prognosis is how long they think the disease will take to reach that terminal state. 6 months or less. A doctor does not graduate and get their medical degree and a crystal ball so that they can look in it and see for each patient how long. They are making their best guess. Now, their guess is based on research, your medical history, what your test results are saying right now. And so, in all probability, somebody with this person's particular series of symptoms, with this particular disease, who's responded to treatment in this way, will have a prognosis of 6 months or less. That's not always the case. People outlive their prognosis all the time. They also underlive their prognosis all the time. And so, yes, there are certainly people who are on hospice for 6 days, 6 weeks, 18 months. 2 years is abnormal, but not impossible. Part of the hospice process is reevaluation, recertification, I think is the Medicare term for it, where, again, you're seeing nurses regularly, you're still having tests run, things like that, and they decide whether or not you can stay on hospice or if you are going to have a living discharge or graduation.
Just one other point on that. Alzheimer's and dementia, is that a terminal disease? I mean, it's so. I'm here because I have a 92-year-old mother that I'm cared for every day.
Yes, yeah.
It's killing me.
I'm sorry. Let's connect after because I can talk to you about some resources. So there are lots of, dementia is sort of an umbrella, and there are lots of things that fall under it. Alzheimer's is a brain disease, and so there's atrophy that is going on. So even if you had no comorbid conditions, which means like co-occurring conditions, yes, eventually it is fatal. Eventually your brain will deteriorate enough. That can take a long time, and also most people have other things happening to their health at the same time. So one of the things that can be challenging for families with things like Alzheimer's is that that disease progression can last 7 years, a decade, 12 years, and be a slow decline, or the decline sort of does this and then plateaus, and then does this and then plateaus. And so some of the planning around care, because this could take years, and because that hospice phase is 6 months or less, which is very far down the road of having been doing caregiving, that can be particularly challenging. The good news is there are specific resources focused on Alzheimer's. Lots of them are community resources, so we'll talk about what community you're in and try to get you connected to some of those. For caregivers and for families, because they recognize that because this is such a long-standing illness, more supports are needed. And of course, more supports could be available. We could definitely use more of them. I saw a question over here. Yeah.
When I submitted my advance directives to the registry, they sent out a card, and sent out with some small stickers that you can apply to the back of your license, etc. License gets replaced, medical cards get replaced. I went online to get replacement stickers, and you want to charge money for it. Have you heard of that? Have you come across that?
I have not, so I'm sorry to hear that.
Would you repeat that?
Yes, I'm sorry. Okay. So completed it, an advance directive, posted it to the registry, received in the mail stickers, which you can put on the back of your license and things like that. And you can put it in a variety of places. You only get a limited number of those stickers. And of course, then you've replaced your license and you need a new sticker. Well, if you run out of stickers and go online, they charge you to get more of them. Everything else about this process is free. Using the registry is free. So that's unfortunate. I imagine it has something to do with their overhead of like printing them and mailing them out and managing this database. But that is the first time I've heard that you get charged for additional stickers. Yes.
I have a situation that happened when I was volunteer. And there was a family with a woman who was at end of life. They had set up the advance directive. The family had gathered. They were all in agreement. And all of a sudden, this niece shows up who hasn't seen her aunt for 5 years. And because of her resistance to what this dying person had in her plan, it was 2 weeks longer that this woman was in the hospital. And I just wondered, I mean, I don't know if it would have been your place, but if you were there, end of life, and this niece showed up, is there anything that you would have done? I think it was just, I mean, really criminal in a way.
Sure. So the question is about family dynamics at its heart. And so in this particular situation that you witnessed as a volunteer chaplain, there was an individual who was passing, family had gathered around, there was an advance directive?
Absolutely.
Okay, there was an advance directive, clearly spelled out her wishes. Another family member comes who it sounds like had not been as involved in day-to-day care and maybe didn't have the same information about what this individual really wanted. Strongly, I'm going to assume, expressed resistance, and so the course of treatment was changed and the person lingered, it sounds like several weeks longer than they might have otherwise, and it caused a lot of strife.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
The niece knew what the woman wanted.
Yeah, oh, the family was very clear about that. Yeah, so she was still really pushing. Oh, no, this
Okay. All right, so there's a family member who very clearly knows what this individual wants, at minimum from the other family members who have been directly informed, and they do not want that for their loved one who is dying. This is not uncommon. And so as a doula, what's my role in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, even if you were in that situation, would you say, I opt out? I mean, I'm just,
So,
but I'm wondering what you would have done.
yeah. So one of the things that I try to do in situations like that, and again, I have no magic wand to make people comply. Man, it would be nice. I have a toddler. If I had a magic wand, we would get out of the house on time every morning. We do not. But in a situation like that, what I do is I make a lot of factual statements and say, you know, I was hired to make sure that We're going to call this person Jane. I don't know anything about your client, so this is a fictional person. I was hired to make sure that Jane's wishes were known and were respected as much as possible. This is what Jane expressed to me. I want to make sure that we're all really clear that these were Jane's wishes, and her intention in hiring me and having me talk to all of you was to make sure you knew it and that you could follow through on those wishes. And I present things in those ways. So I don't tell people what they have to do or what they should do, but I make it really clear what the intentions were, what the plan was in place, what we've got documented. I am a person that writes things down. And so it's not Kasey's memory or the spouse's memory. It's, hey, we had a meeting on this day, and this is what we agreed to, and this is what Jane said, and want to distribute it to everybody.
I think that is so perfect. I love it how you're just dealing with the facts, not with the emotions, to say this is what she wanted, this is here.
It takes a long time to sort through emotions, and we don't normally have that much time. Yeah.
Change.
And they change, yeah, from minute to minute, before and after you eat. Okay, I do recognize that we are past 2 o'clock, so I am going to wrap us up. Thank you so much. You've had wonderful questions today. If you did not, here we go. If you did not sign in on the sign-in sheet, all of those resources that I said, like I'm going to give you the brain thing and I'm going to give you the resource on how to choose an end-of-life doula, feel free, come on up front and we'll make sure that your email address is on it so I can send you those. But I will also hang around for additional questions and conversation. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.